I always remind myself that when Kevin wants to teach us lyrics to a song, it's important to listen to the lyrics but not try to hit the pitch that Kevin's at, because I was struggling there for a minute. So the lyrics are good. Pitch, I got to manage that. That's not your fault. That's mine. So that got a little high and shouldn't have. So I apologize when we sing that out. That was a little spicy. If you have your Bibles, and I hope you do, we're continuing to walk through the book of Psalms and show how it's a coherent whole telling one big story. And we are moving into book 4 of the Psalms with Psalm 90 today. So if you have your Bibles, we are going to be in Psalm 90. And as we walk through this, you're going to see just some incredible moments that Moses, the author, has had. And that's what we see. God is moving from kind of this case study in David's life of Psalm 1 and 2 into his people's and really into the heroes of the faith that we see with someone like Moses, because to this original audience, hearing from Moses would have been the pinnacle of who you would want to hear from. It was interesting. I'd followed up and made sure I paid my life insurance bill a few weeks ago, which is important. Morgan made sure that happened. This isn't a Dave Ramsey sermon, so there is wisdom in doing that, but we can talk about that later. But I thought about it more this time than usual. The boys were playing and making noise while I was doing this, and it hit me. You know, when I was young, I never thought I'd get old. Peggy's amening. That's right, Peggy. Well, I've gotten older. I knew my mom struggled with high cholesterol, but that was something that old people did. Well, I have aggressively high cholesterol. What hit me like a brick that morning and talking to Morgan was the realization that, man, one day I won't be with these boys that are playing in my house. There'll be a day when they need me and I won't be there. It really made me ask, with some fear and longing for hope. I wanted something deep to anchor myself in that day. Will what I teach them last? Will my life really count for something? Will I have shown them the way to life and flourishing? I started counting off, if I died, who would be at my funeral, and it was a very short list. I was like, Morgan, there's nobody going to be there. Will my life have mattered, right? And I told Morgan it broke my heart, and I was afraid. I told her I hated it, and she looked at me and said, you should hate it. You're supposed to hate it. I was facing fear and remembered the gospel tells me God has done something epic about those specific fears. Isn't that incredible? That very moment, those very things. Here's a question we all ask, and the wisdom Moses wants us to see of Psalm 90. And let this see if this hits where you are. Do you long to achieve something worthwhile for Jesus in your life? Do you long for that? Do you long for your life to count for something? Don't we all yearn for that? The big surprise at the end of Psalm 90 is that we are actually authorized to ask God to establish the work of our hands so it lasts forever. Verse 17. To make what we do last for eternity. Did you know that what I can pour into my sons can matter forever? It's an incredible thing. So we're going to see 3 things as we move through Psalm 90. Knowing our place, knowing our greatest problem in the wonderful work of Christ. If you fear the things that I fear, then Psalm 90 is for you. Verses 1 to 6 of Psalm 90, Lord, you have been our refuge in every generation. Before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and to the world, from eternity to eternity, you are God. You return mankind to the dust, saying, return descendants of Adam. For in your sight, 1,000 years are like yesterday that passes by, like a few hours of the night. You end their lives and they sleep. They are like grass that grows in the morning. In the morning it sprouts and grows. By evening it withers and dries up. So we've been learning that the 5 books are telling one story of reality, and the Psalms are a roadmap to God through the human experience that we all live. Book 4 is beginning here, and it begins with the people of God in the place that I was when I'm paying my life insurance bill. And what's incredible is things do not go from cries of abandonment to praise in quick fashion. Moses isn't super spiritual and says, well, I just had more faith, so I just kind of got it. What Moses is showing us is that we're authorized to ask God what we're afraid of and that we need hope. Isn't that incredible? That is prayer. Maybe you think you've got to have it all together to go to God. And Moses himself, right? Moses, not me. Moses is saying, I'm struggling being afraid. That means you can too. Longing for faithfulness bigger than their fears. Does it not hit all of us where we're at in life? Wondering if everything truly can come untrue. When we all fall so much and the world seems like a mess, Moses is authorizing us to ask. And here's the hope we can have right off the bat. Verses 1 to 2, Lord, you have been our refuge in every generation before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and the world. From eternity to eternity, you are God. Now, how does that give me hope when I pay my life insurance? Because it means that before he made me, he is who he is. Before he created a thing, he is who he is. The character of God was already there. His faithful love toward you, his power to see home come one day, his patience, his all-knowing, all-present, and total control sovereignty. Do you realize that was there? The plan to save me and give me a hope was there before he created a single thing. Can you grab hold of that? My fears aren't God, he is. Let this hit home. A.W. Tozer said, before God created a thing, he wasn't doing nothing. His mind was stirring with thoughts of you. How incredible is that? That's why the Bible calls Jesus the Lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world. What that means for you in your fears is that God had a plan to fix the mess before he even made you. What a God! If that's who he was before you were made, you can trust him to get you home. You can anchor yourself in the character of God. That's why a long time ago, that was one of the main things we did with our small groups. We walked through a book talking through the attributes of God. Why is that so important? Because I've got to know who this God is that I can cling to. And he is the God who was before he even made me, stirring his mind with affections toward me. Can you grab hold of that? Genesis 1:1 is not where God begins. He was before that, and before that, his mind was stirring with thoughts and affections for you. And it means that my fears don't get the last word, God does. If God, who did not even spare his own son, is the God of reality, and your reality centers on him, we can know his eternal faithfulness is our home, not this world. He is our home, not this world. If I think I am what shapes my sons into courageous men, then I will be paralyzed by every decision and word I say. I am not the hero of my son's story. Jesus Christ is. Isn't that incredible? Because I fail at it all the time. Morgan will tell you that. There are days when I just look at her and I'm like, I can't parent. And then there's days where she looks at me and says, you can't parent right now. Sit this next couple plays out. But I'm not the hero. But if God is my home, if he is the home I can point them to and know what I long for will be accomplished. This is a prayer of hope from desperation and fear. God is telling us to invite him in. Isn't that incredible wisdom? Does that not change the way you view prayer? I think that's one of the biggest things I've wanted us to see in this, that prayer in my life was always this punishment. I say it often, but for me, it was literally a punishment in Lutheran school when I got in trouble in chapel. I got told I had to write a prayer. Prayer is not punishment. Paul Miller said, prayer is asking God to incarnate, to get dirty in your life. Yes, the eternal God scrubs floors. For sure, we know that he washes feet, so take Jesus at his word. Ask him. Tell him what you want. Get dirty. Write out your prayer requests. Don't mindlessly drift through life on the American narcotic of busyness. If you try to seize the day in your own strength, the day will eventually break you. Seize the corner of his garment and don't let go until he blesses you. Isn't that incredible? When we are faced with the reality of verses 3 to 6, we can stop running. We can invite him in. 3 to 6, you return mankind to dust, saying, return, descendants of Adam. For in your sight, God, 1,000 years are like yesterday that passes by, like a few hours of the night. He's going into the transience of our life, which we're confronted with, and that's tough, isn't it? Don't worry, Moses gets more depressing before he ends on an unreal hope, but it gets worse. Thanks, Moses. But this is the contrast that we can make that helps us realize that running for office of God is a really dumb thing to do. We need this sober realism about our frailty, our mortality, our transience, because it makes us ask the central verse of this psalm. And this is what you should underline if you are following along. Verse 12, teach us to number our days carefully so that we may develop wisdom in our hearts. If I know that I am transient, if I know that at the end of the day I am not the hero of this story, but God is, then I can ask him this central question, and he wants you to. Give me wisdom in how to live today, not because today is all there is, but in light of eternity. I want what I'm doing to last. I want my life to matter. Have you ever felt that way? I want my life to count for something. There's so much hope in that when we are loaded with the fear and regret of this life, we aren't all there is. That he is. None of this has gone the way we thought it would. Is that fair to say for everybody? If you look back at your journal from when you were in middle school and say, yeah, man, I've nailed it. This is killed it. This is perfect. No, but this is a reality. We put all the pressure of flourishing and mattering on that middle school kid, and we haven't seen things play out the way we thought. And so what do? We blame ourselves or we blame God. Christopher Ash is an incredible commentator on this psalm, and he said, we may be blighted and weighed down by the great expectation loaded on us. Perhaps in childhood or early adulthood, perhaps our parents had hoped things for us and let us know what they had hoped, that we would succeed in these particular ways. Maybe they wanted us to be the successful in exams or music or sports or jobs that they had failed to be or never had the opportunity to be. How sad we feel when we begin to realize that we will never achieve what they have expected for us or what we have expected for ourselves. If you live in that, you will be absolutely crushed. And Moses is saying, don't look at yourself. Lift your eyes up to the God who was before everything. If you're walking in here and you're carrying the weight of fixing all of the mess, God is saying you can't, and that's really good news. Your life can matter if you rest in what he is saying life is found in. Have you ever let yourself down? Ever feel like you won't live up to your own expectations? Will we first find hope when we know there is a place where what we truly long for will be done? And God is saying, I established that home before I even made you, and I am faithful to get you to it. There's an incredible story. J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings, which I reference probably too much. For some, nah. Yeah, thank you guys. That's why I looked over here when I said that. Thanks, fellas. But Tolkien, when he had started Lord of the Rings, this epic book series, and then World War II hit, and he was crushed because he felt like, I will never finish the greatest work of my life. And he wrote a book called Leaf. And what it is it's about this author and this painter and this artist named Nigel. Why he picked that name, I have no idea. Could have been Steve. But here's the thing that Tolkien wanted us to get. See, in Nigel's life, he wanted to paint this masterpiece of a tree. And yet all he got out before he died was one leaf. And he was so depressed. He thought, I had this vision of what my life would be. I thought there was this thing I would accomplish. But the angel carries him to heaven. And the second he walks into heaven, he sees the tree that he had dreamt of. We may only get a leaf out in this life, but God is saying what you have longed to accomplish, I've already got there. I can tell you out of all the things I've ever done in my life, this is the proudest thing I've ever done. this church. It may never be what I long for it to be, but this may be the leaf, and when I get to glory, there will be a tree. You may only get a leaf out in this life. I may only do a little bit in my sons' lives, but that tree is stinking real. It is fully done. That was Tolkien's wisdom to us. All right. Here's the bad news. It gets worse before it gets better. And we have to know this why, though, to see this is why we're in the mess we're in. There's hard language in what he's about to go into, verses 7 to 12. Here we go, life verse for everybody. For we are consumed by your anger. We are terrified by your wrath. That's my next tattoo, Juju. You have set our iniquities before us, our secret sins in the light of your presence. For all our days ebb away under your wrath. We end our years like a sigh. Our lives last 70 years, or if we're strong, maybe 80. Even the best of them are struggle and sorrow. Indeed, they pass quickly and they fly away. Who understands the power of your anger? Your wrath matches the fear that is due you. Teach us to number our days carefully so that we may develop wisdom in our hearts. You have to understand, for these people in the original audience, God is pouring it out on Israel bad. They had been carried off into exile because they'd been doing what they wanted to do. They'd stopped listening to God. They stopped living on mission and stopped reaching the nations. They had become inwardly focused as a church and nationalistic. And worst of all, they fell in love with the Babylonian dream of self-expression and comforts. Does that sound familiar at all on both sides of this country? We aren't exiled by God like them, but we know the feeling of exile, don't we? Looking for people or places or things to fulfill this hope and this longing, and they never quite hold up under the weight that we put on them. Feeling like things aren't how they're supposed to be. Longing for a home where we are whole and secure. And here's what Moses is saying. Not only are we transient, we're in trouble a little bit. And here's what we have to see. God hates that things aren't how they're supposed to be. Isn't that good news? God doesn't like that things are broken. He hates it. And the reality Moses wants us to see is that we have all held up a spray paint can to how things are supposed to be and vandalized what he made. We've all been a part of it. And his hate for that sin is called wrath. And Moses will use that word a lot in this psalm. And that can make us shrink back, right? No one likes hearing words like wrath. I know churches and pastors that actually skip over this specific passage, but that's not what we do here. It's in the Bible, right? So let's talk about it. Let's understand what his anger and his wrath is and what it's directed toward. His wrath is not a lightning bolt. He's not the mean referee, fun police in the sky that is out to strike you down with a lightning bolt if you do a no-no. That's not his wrath. His wrath is a right anger toward things being broken. Thank God that he's angry, that things aren't how they're supposed to be. And here's how this plays out in our lives. Here's what he does in his anger toward what we choose other than him. Tim Keller says God's wrath is him letting me have too much of what I want besides him anyways. God's wrath is saying, your will be done, Jason. You don't want me, you want these other things, or you want to put this pressure on these people? Do it. And I'll let it break you so that you come home. See, it's not a lightning bolt. It's God saying, I will let you have too much of what you want apart from me anyways. Isn't that much worse than a lightning bolt? Sometimes I'd rather have the lightning bolt. It's a lot quicker. It's a quicker death. See, when we tell God who made us and ordered this world to flourish in specific ways that we know better than him, he tells us at some point, your will be done. We think God is a bad guy for wrath and hell, but here's the reality about those things. C.S. Lewis says this, hell's doors are locked from the inside. Isn't that an incredible way to look at things? See, in the end, there are only two types of people: those who say to God, "Thy will be done in this life," or those at the end of our lives where God says, "Thy will be done." Hell's doors are locked, not from the outside because of an angry God, but from the inside because we tell him we don't want anything to do with him. And he finally says, "Your will be done." And here's what's incredible. This is his wrath and his anger. God hates that we choose things and people other than him. Not because he's some insecure being, but because he's a loving father telling his children he loves, "Don't play in the street because I love you." And we are psychopaths because we like to play in the street. I know I am. But when we realize the folly of our running from God, we can reorder our lives and our longings for what truly matters. That's what Moses is saying we do in light of this. See, realizing that drives us to the gospel and hope in a new way of life with him. Edmund Clowney said, "Our deepest needs drive us to our deepest beliefs." What hope do we have? Moses proclaims it's Jesus Christ and our sure hope now forever. Our deepest needs drive us to what you believe the most. Paul Miller and Paul Tripp both say the same thing in their separate books. They say that in the midst of suffering, in the midst of things that aren't how they're supposed to be, you are all theologians. Every one of you. Every one of us. Because we all believe and preach some sort of gospel to ourselves. Moses prays in verse 12 then, "Teach us to number our days carefully so that we may develop wisdom in our longings, our perspective, and how we interpret our world." Because Moses is saying in the midst of things being broken, you are going to preach some gospel to yourself. Now in the midst of them broken, look at God to define what that gospel is. And to get there, Moses takes an honest road. You've probably heard it said a lot. That for there to be good news, there has to be some bad. Well, this is the bad. I promise this ends on a good note. We'll get there. But sin has brought God's wrath against it. What does that mean? It means he hates funerals so much he died to conquer them. Isn't that good news? He hates that we die. He hates the self-destructive ways we look for life apart from him. He hates it and is begging us come home. And Jesus took all of that anger towards sin and drank it to the last drop for us. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that good news? See, here's the reality. We all hear all the time, God is love, right? Who's heard that recently? Well, God is love. God is love. He's just love. You can't have love without a right anger toward what breaks the people you love. You can't have love without a right anger. It doesn't exist. Who says they love kids and could care less that they're abused? Is that love? Well, mom and dad are love. I know you got picked on at school, but I don't care, man. I'm love. You can't have love without a right anger toward the very things that break the people that you care about. There is a place for right anger against what wounds us. I really hope that this gives us an understanding, because it's hard for me. When I read through books of the Bible and I hit passages like this, I don't want to talk about God's wrath. Who enjoys that? But is it or is it not in your Bible? It's there, so let's talk about it and understand that there's really good news in it. Two things that come from it Moses wants us to see. God hates that they're funerals, and he's done something about it. And Jesus Christ died on the cross, and the crushing weight of that cross was not the physical execution. It was God's wrath and anger towards sin poured out upon him. That's what crushed him in the garden. He came face to face with God's wrath in the garden, and it was so terrifying, it caused his capillaries to burst, and he sweat blood. It wasn't fear of the physical pain, it was fear of the cross and the wrath that would be poured out upon him on that cross that terrified Christ. He hates it. And we see this in his own life. When Jesus arrives at the tomb of his friend Lazarus, the book of John uses intense language. It says that he was deeply moved. That word in the Greek is only used to describe a bucking horse biting at his bridle in rage. Jesus was not passive. He was enraged at the death of his friend. Why? Because he hates that things aren't how they're supposed to be. Because creation was shattered, we will all see our bodies give out. You should hate it. He hates it. But what's incredible is he has done something about it at more cost than we can ever imagine. Here's where Moses turns to an unreal hope. Verses 13 to 17, Lord, how long? Turn and have compassion on us, because we realize our greatest problem. Satisfy us in the morning with your faithful love, so that we may shout with joy and be glad all our days. Make us rejoice for as many days as you have numbered for us. For as many years as you have seen, for we have seen adversity, let your work be seen by your servants. That's important. And your splendor by their children. Let the favor of the Lord our God be on us. Establish for us the work of our hands. Establish the work of our hands. If there's anything Moses wants us to know, it is the truth that faithfulness drives out fear. Whatever you're afraid of today, if you're longing for your life to matter and you just feel like it won't, if you're fearful of the transients, if you're 40 and 70 and 80 is looking a lot closer than it used to, that kind of stinks. I found a gray hair this week, and I wept. And then Morgan got tweezers and wanted to pull it out of my neck. I don't want that. I used to think, who buys Just for Men beard coloring? Yeah, this guy's about to. That's who. Poor guys like me. Faithfulness, though, drives out the fear that I'm getting older. I want to repeat Edmund Clowney again. Our deepest needs, those needs and fears, drive us to our deepest beliefs. We should cling to his garment and beg him to bless us and not let go until he does. Isn't that incredible? And here's what Moses says. Don't miss this. Don't miss this. He says in this passage, let your work be seen by your servants. Let your work be seen. Where was it seen? Where did we see the work of God? Any guess what he's pointing to? Jesus Christ. Do you see what Moses is doing? He knows we need a hope. Moses is on this side of the cross. He hasn't seen it yet, but he knows we need a hope bigger than our fears. And Moses is pointing ahead to something that he can't quite see yet. Look at the privilege of us on this side of the cross. When he says, let your work be seen, we get to look back and say, I saw it. Where was his faithfulness shown? The cross. Verse 16, let your work be seen. Where was it seen? His faithfulness was seen by the cosmos on the cross. It is where the Son took what we deserve and drank the cup of it dry. He knew the wrath of God poured out on him. He knew it so that it would never darken our door if we are his. Isn't that amazing? I say this often, but we need to reimagine Jesus. Popular pictures make him look so passive and weak and docile. He was not weak on the cross. He was an absolute warrior taking the fight to hell itself. He was not weak. He was there to take the fight for your life to be made new right to hell's front door. That is a warrior, not a coward. He was not weak. He was the hero of the story that you long for. And he took the anger of God toward sin that day, so all we will ever know is faithful love. What he did was brought home for me a couple years ago when we had Baker. When he was 3 weeks old, we had to take him to a pediatric urologist for a procedure. And they had to strap his little legs down and give him 2 local shots, and he just started screaming. And I was allowed to be in with him. I let that little 3-week-old grasp my finger as he cried and screamed for 20 minutes. I had my face pressed up against his to the point I'm sweating and dripping sweat and saying, Daddy's here, Daddy's here, Daddy's here. I spoke with him the whole time. Daddy's here, Daddy's here. Now picture this. I am 6'3", fluctuates somehow between 227 and 254. It's water weight. Can you imagine how many people it would have taken to get me away from my son? Can you imagine what it would have taken for them to get me away from my baby? Wasn't going to happen. They gave him these little sugar cubes to help him and calm him, and I told that lady, I don't care, keep giving them to him. Well, we only gave him 2. Get the sugar, give it to him now. And it was so bad that when it was done, I went in the other room next to Morgan and I cried to where there was a puddle under my face because it hit me. Do you realize what God and Jesus endured to make death a shadow for us? What he did to take the stinger out of this horrible pain we know in this life. You see, the Father watched his son strapped down. God the Father watched his son strapped to a tree, nailed to it. And in that moment, he actually walked out of the room on his son so that he would never walk out on you. You want faithfulness that drives out fear? How about that? Tell me another reality better than that one. Jesus was abandoned so that you never will be. He will never abandon you. No matter what you've done, he says, you are mine before the foundations of the world. I am who I am, and I am that toward you. Jesus is the Lamb that was slain before the foundations of the world. He knew the mess that we would be in. He knew the self-destructive ways that we would look for wholeness. And he said, I know, I care, and I'm doing something about it. You realize Jesus isn't some abstract thought. Moses is saying he's dealing specifically with your greatest regrets and fears, and he's dealing with the greatest problem you have in your life, that you were separated from God because of sin, and he's saying, I made a way home. I've heard it before from people that are searching through religion and hope with me, and they're asking questions, and one common question is, why would God only make one way to find him? Aren't all religions kind of on other sides of this mountain, and we're all trying to get to God, right? But we're just finding it in different ways. Why would God only make one way? And I tell him, I can't speak for you, but I know me. The fact that God would make a way at all should shake your mind. Not that he made a bunch of ways, but the fact that God made a way doesn't mean that he's mean. He says, I'm full of grace. I actually made a way. Isn't that amazing? He's not mean because he only made one way. He is gracious because he looked at our lives and our mess and said, I'm going to make a way. Isn't that amazing? And he says the way home is by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. How easy is that? He doesn't say, here's a ladder in the pit, clean yourself up, and maybe you'll get home. He said, bro, I'm going to get in the pit with you. I'm going to lift your worthless butt up out of it, and then I'm going to stay in here for punishment for you. That's incredible. If he didn't run away in his darkest hour, he will never run away in yours. So what do? We learn to number our days in light of the gospel. We learn to leverage our lives, our stuff, our time. What? For what matters. Tim Keller said the central basis of Christian assurance is not how much our hearts are set on God, but how unshakably his heart is set on us. The central basis of Christian assurance is not how much you can set your heart on God, but how unshakably his heart is set on us. That is the wisdom of Moses in Psalm 90. If the gospel is what you live for, you can know it will win in the end. You may only get a leaf out in this life, but when you step into heaven, that tree is blazing bright. Isn't that incredible? Do you long for your life to matter? Do you long for an end to regret and sadness and fights with sin? Do you long to see the good guys win in the end? Moses is saying, let God teach you how to establish the work of your hands so that it'll last forever. Let me pray. Lord, thank you for the wisdom of men and women that have gone before us, that you inspired to write your word, your revelation of who you are for us. That in the life of Moses, we saw everything. We saw an utter failure. Someone who committed murder. Encounter the gospel. Encounter the great I am. Because before the foundations of the world, you are. Right now, you are. And you are already in the future that is one secure for us, that we may only get a leaf out in this life. But what we long for when you establish the work of our hands is fully completed in heaven, waiting on us. There's so much wisdom in that. And that we have the blessing of being on this side of the cross so that when you say, let your work be seen, we've seen it. So Lord, teach us to number our days, not in fear, but to be anchored in the faithfulness of God, in the unshakable character of who you are toward us. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.